Hi there, I'm doing TTRPG talks with Matthew Dawkins, the gentleman gamer. Welcome, friend.
Hello, good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Um, I usually start with kind of a bit of an overview on who we're talking to today. As mentioned, the gentleman gamer, longtime YouTube fan, probably most notably known for your Vampire the Masquerade and Otherworld of Darkness on that channel, at least in the early days. Uh,
Yeah, I imagine so. I
mm,
think that's why most people stumble upon me, even now.
yeah. Um, but you've been involved in quite a bit in the TTRPG space ever since, and moving on from that into a number of things. So we can kind of go over that. But I'm real curious now. I ask everyone I can this as they come in because it's a bonding part of the hobby. What brought you
Yeah.
into the hobby to begin with?
Oh, so I guess the question for me is where did the journey actually start? Because it would be very easy for me to say that I was a big fan of the Baldur's Gate video games, and someone at the college I was attending, a librarian, saw me checking out a Baldur's Gate website to do with the NPCs. I can remember it very clearly and sort of slunk up behind me and placed his hand on the back of mine while I was operating the mouse. It was a bit of a creepy introduction and said, I know a club where people play games like that. And then tried to get me into a different game. He navigated the mouse while my hand was still on it to a different website. But uh, that was my most direct route into role playing because that was the first my introduction to tabletop RPGs. He invited me to a club. Against my better nature, I actually went. And I ultimately played games like, well, the first game I played there was Hercules and Xena: The Legendary Journeys because I turned up on the wrong weekend. And they ran games alternating on alternating weeks. There were three tables, so three groups, and the one I was joining was Hercules and Xena one week, Dungeons and Dragons on the next, and I joined up for both. And whenever campaigns ended, new games were played. But before that, going way back before that, I was into these books called fighting fantasy books, which were always a much bigger deal over here in Europe than in America, but they definitely existed in America. Books like The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, uh, Forest of Doom, Caverns of the Snow Witch, that kind of thing. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I absolutely fell in love with the idea of stories where you could choose the direction. I had seen Choose Your Own Adventure books, and they always seemed a little too tame, except for the one where you get reduced in size and can get crushed and eaten by insects. That was a highlight. But the fighting fantasy ones with all the orcs and dark elves and chaos warriors and everything, because it was by most of them, or some of them were by Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, who were, of course, also behind Games Workshop and Warhammer, so there's a lot of crossover there. Introduced me to the idea that you could uh, play a game with a book. You could create a character and make choices based on how you wanted that character to appear. What their, I guess, if you like, what their philosophy was. Are they going to be a gung-ho, kill everything type? Are they going to sneak around? Are they going to try outthinking the enemy? That sort of thing. So, yeah, and I'm sure there's a genesis even prior to that, but that's probably what I'd put a pin in.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Hercules and Xena, and for about 2 minutes, my mind was going around going, "Oh, what was that system?" I feel like I ran into that. There are a lot of those, so
So,
Buffy, and a lot of those kind of systems. But
It was D6 based. I think it was a pool of D6s from memory. I only played it once, and this was back in like 1999. But I'm fairly certain it was D6s. But beyond that, yeah, it was probably quite close to Uni System or something like that, which All Flesh Must Be Eaten uses. But I could be wrong.
that sounds about right, honestly. What led to you moving into the Gentleman Gamer? Because that was pretty early YouTube, right? Like that got to
Yeah,
be 2010, 2012, somewhere in there.
yeah. I think I started the channel in 2009, and I have been fairly keen on deleting old videos if I don't feel they're. Well, I don't really rewatch them, but I might have a memory of, oh, this video probably doesn't stand up anymore, so delete that. So the first few videos I made, probably 5 or 6, they're all gone. You probably could find them reflected somewhere on Daily Motion or something like that. But I started in 2009 or thereabouts because I was looking for a review of Slay Industries, which is an RPG I have enjoyed for a very long time. Some people say it's SLA Industries. It isn't. It is definitely Slay Industries. And I found this review on YouTube by a YouTuber by the name of Captain Machine, who I am still occasionally in touch with, very loosely. And Captain Machine was reviewing Slay Industries. He was a guy from the north of England. And it was a perfectly decent review. But I remember watching it and thinking, you know what, I could do that. And I could probably do it with less ums and ers and hesitations and repetitions and things like that, because I've always been a fairly articulate person. I know how to structure a sentence. And when I say things like that, I always make the person I'm speaking to very self-conscious of their ums and ers and likes and your nose. So have fun with that.
Right. Yeah, it's fair. You mentioned, oh, there we go. You mentioned a while back that you've removed some of your old content. So a little bit of a story there. During the pandemic, I went back because I remembered you ran a diplomacy game, like a play by email, over your
Yeah.
channel, and I was trying to connect with some old friends and went to go look for that format, and I couldn't find that video. I'm like, oh, I need to get rid of them.
But so originally it wasn't the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. It was just me talking to a camera. And it was one of my very first commenters. I think it's a guy by the name of Tetsubo who still makes videos to this day, just a daily vlog. He's been doing it for years and years and years. And he described how, well, my, I guess, philosophy of making videos was I didn't want to do an angry video game nerd style ranting about the product I love. I know AVGN does that for comedy, and I never really saw the I saw the funny side in short bursts, but I didn't think it was a kind of approach that I really appreciated to any fine detail. I wanted to make videos about games I really enjoyed and then tell people why they are fun. I wanted to always highlight the positive things. And so that's what I did in the first few videos I made. And I think it was Tetsubo said, you should call yourself a gentleman gamer or something like that. And so I started doing the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, because at the time that sounded like it's a gentle means of review. It's a generous way of talking about games. And I appreciate now that there's probably a lot of YouTubers, Twitch streamers, and other people that call themselves gentlemen, tip their hat a lot and say milady, and are generally utterly atrocious incel types. But that wasn't the idea behind mine. I wasn't trying to set myself up as some kind of bizarre alpha male or whatever they call them these days. It was done with the best of intentions.
It lined up really well too with your, a lot of your content was in the Vampire the Masquerade space, so I think it lined up really well with that. Specifically the Ventru.
Yeah, a lot of people attach me to Clan Ventru. I assume it's the English accent and the air of authority I project when I do videos about vampires. They think, oh, this guy's playing a Ventru. And at some point, I started wearing a clan pin consistently in those videos, which wasn't Clan Ventru, and it blew a few people's minds. They thought, this guy's a harbinger of skulls. And a part of that was just to say to them, look, vampires don't have to be a certain way to fit into a certain clan. But also, I liked talking about the vampire clans from a position of being on the outside of the system. If I had been playing a Ventru, and I don't know how pretentious this sounds, apologies if it does. If I had been playing a Ventru, I think I would have approached it more derisively. I imagine I would have been more about self-elevation than talking about what is strong, what is good about the other clans, whereas playing a Harbinger or Cappadocian or whatever, I was able to observe like an anthropologist or sociologist observing these societies of vampires. So there was an idea behind it. I don't know how much of it came through, but I ended up sticking with it.
It was definitely very popular. I remember at the time, anywhere where there were games in the online space that I was related to, your videos got thrown around as you want to learn how to play this clan, take a look at what this guy's doing with this clan. And in your takes weren't, like you said, they weren't always like orthodox to what the clan stereotype was, which was even better. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the intent. The first few Gentleman's Guide to Vampires videos were not done in character from memory. Again, they aren't videos I have rewatched, but I remember, I think, starting with Ravnos, and the whole idea of doing the Ravnos was they were a clan that pretty much everybody hated. They a deeply flawed clan, and I wanted to make a video about what is fun about the Ravnos, in keeping with the rest of the videos I made on my channel. What's fun about this game? What's fun about that? And 3 or 4 videos in, I started talking about the clans from an in-character perspective rather than an out-of-character perspective. So, yeah, even that changed to a degree. I think they are still the most popular videos on my channel, which is insane given that I made them in like 2010, 2011, 2012 or thereabouts. And then the Pentext Guide to Werewolves, which are pretty popular as well. I don't think I've ever made a series quite as consistently popular as those ones. But yeah, in a way it's to be expected. The World of Darkness is a very popular property. And whenever I make a World of Darkness themed video now, that still always draws considerably more viewers than a video on, let's say, The World Below or Curseborne, no matter how much I love those games.
What was your first step into the TTRPG space as an author or writer?
So, way back in 2006 or 2007, I sent my first pitches into White Wolf, as they were. So this is White Wolf under CCP's ownership, I think. Because they were making various Bloodlines books for Vampire the Requiem. And there was a competition on the White Wolf website where you could submit Bloodlines for inclusion in the next Bloodlines book. And so I decided to send one in. It didn't get published. I have no doubt that my material was absolute crap, because this was my first attempt at creative writing, really, outside of a school setting. Later, there was a Vampire the Masquerade trivia game where they advertised either on the White Wolf forums or on the website. We're looking for people who know an awful lot about Vampire the Masquerade to, I guess, option the idea of being co-authors of the Vampire the Masquerade trivia game. That was something I got hired for. I was to co-write the Malkavian section of that game. It's a game that never got published, but I still have all of the documents from it. And it was a terrible game. It really was awful. It was crap. The level of detail you would need to possess, and I include my content in this, the amount of detail you'd need to possess to know Ozzy Hyde White is a vampire in which city. And for 1 point, you might know he's in Berlin. And then for 3 points, you have to know the name of his sire. And for 5 points, you have to know what color is the suit he's described as wearing on this page of Berlin by Night. So it was more than Trivial Pursuit. This was hardcore encyclopedic knowledge that only people like me, who had become utterly entrenched, if not obsessed, in World of Darkness lore, would be able to pick up on. So there's no wonder it wasn't published. But from time to time, I would send pitches or writing submissions off to various companies, and I never really had any luck beyond the trivia game. So I was pretty convinced that it was due to my writing quality, and that wasn't me beating myself up. I just had no training in how to write in a game setting. I could copy, clearly, what was in existing games and adjust, but that wasn't really what I needed. So I saved up a lot of money. I sold off the majority of my Planescape books, my Deadlands books, because I wanted to go in on one of the Kickstarters that Onyx Path was doing for Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition as a consulting developer. And that was always a high Kickstarter backer tier. The idea of the consulting developer role was you could essentially observe a book getting made. You'd be able to see the first drafts, the red lines, the final drafts. You could speak with a developer about what worked and what didn't. And a lot of people sign up to those things, and there's nothing wrong with this, by the way. A lot of people sign up to these things because they're fans, because they want to see how the sausage gets made. And that's it. All they want to do is see the previews of the manuscripts before they come out.
Yeah, exactly.
I signed up more as a creative writing course because I wanted to see what developers were looking for from written submissions. They had already hired their writers, so I wanted to see the quality of first drafts. I wanted to see what kind of red lines developers added, so those are the comments in the margins of a manuscript, and corrections, how they liked sentences and powers and things like that being phrased exactly. I wanted to see the whole process so that I could then make a submission that matched their style. And I got to work on the Book of the Worm based on that consulting development gig, just because I had some ideas and because of what I was learning. But my first paid writing gig with Onyx Path was a submission I wrote further to that on Mummy the Curse.
Okay.
Which was a game I was very hotly anticipating for Chronicles of Darkness. I sent a written submission in. I was hired by the developer to work on a book called Sophis Ascends, 20,000 words, writing about the era in which is the rise of Islam, basically. And I had no knowledge of the rise of Islam or that part of the world, but I took the job seriously. I spent hours, days in libraries, literally researching, watching documentaries, doing all kinds of funky stuff to make sure my work was both interesting from a mummy perspective, but also historically as accurate and intriguing, tied to real-world events as possible. And yeah, from there, I think I developed a reputation as someone who could handle a lot of words, do so on time, to a reasonable, if not good quality, and that's how you keep getting hired. It's hitting deadlines, it's hitting word counts, it isn't filling your material with stuff to just pad it out. It's making sure there is a story hook in every single paragraph, so that there is always something a storyteller or story guide or whatever game you're running or player can use in this book. It can't just be for your sake as a writer. So yeah, long answer, but I am not prone to short ones.
Well, no, you're all good. That was interesting. You made mention of Chronicles of Darkness. I remember when the name switch happened there. It always brings me back to when they first chose New World of Darkness as like the name for what they were doing, and we had this casual guy in our group who was super cool and almost like you wouldn't expect him to be part of the gaming community, but he always had these little one-liners that were amazing. He walked by the book and he tapped it and he said, "What makes this new?" And we said, "Well, it's the old one ended, so this is the new one." He's like, "Won't always be new," and he just kept going, and we're like, looking back, yeah, it's a good way to phrase it.
I mean, it's a fan epithet because the books themselves were always just World of Darkness. But yeah, I completely see that your buddy's point there. And the old World of Darkness, as it became known, I've always preferred the name Classic World of Darkness. I always thought classic sounds a little more has a little more air of pomposity to it that suits the World of Darkness. But I remember when what we call the New World of Darkness came out, and I was so eagerly anticipating the release of the World of Darkness and Vampire the Requiem that were released on the same day, because you needed the World of Darkness book to create a character. It had the core of the system, and Vampire the Requiem had your vampire add-ons, and so it was for each of the additional World of Darkness game lines. That changed with Chronicles of Darkness, where each game is an encapsulated game in its own right. Each one has the system within it. But for the first edition, World of Darkness, New World of Darkness, the World of Darkness book was necessary. And it was a very different time in gaming because our local game store, which was one city over, it was a place called Hidden Fortress, and doesn't exist anymore, sadly, was besieged with pre-orders for World of Darkness and Vampire the Requiem, to the point that on the day of release, there was a queue, and this sounds hyperbolic, and it isn't. There was a queue that stretched out of the store, went out, up the street to essentially the end of the block. People going in and picking up their pre-ordered copies of World of Darkness and Vampire the Requiem.
It's like a Zelda release. That's
yeah, or Final Fantasy or Pokemon or any of these other big video game franchises, but this was a tabletop RPG. And I remember D&D 3rd edition had something very similar, because that was another game that was very much anticipated. 3.5 even had that too. And I remember picking those books up, going to a department store, a place called Debenhams. As soon as I bought them, sitting down in the cafe and spending the rest of the day just sitting in the cafe, drinking lots of tea, eating lots of baked goods, and just reading and reading and reading, because I absolutely loved it. And I think and I of course bounced off certain parts of Requiem, just like a lot of people did. Oh, well, this isn't as different from Masquerade as I thought it would be, or this isn't as close to Masquerade as I thought it would be. That was always bound to happen. And there's lots of discussion that even goes on today about what worked and what didn't with Requiem. But overall, I was just so excited. I was so enthusiastic. It's the last game, and this may sound utterly jaded, it's the last game that I remember feeling genuinely excited about buying. I had a real childish enthusiasm for it, and just wanted to run it as soon as I bought it. There's people who will say it killed the World of Darkness, it killed the old World of Darkness, and all of that. But the fact is, even though the source books didn't do quite as well, to my knowledge, the World of Darkness and Vampire the Requiem combo outsold all prior editions of Vampire the Masquerade. There's a lot of people who will argue that, but I have seen the data to support it. Now, I don't know if 5th edition has done better. I would imagine not. The Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, yeah, I would suspect not, just because it's a different market these days. And Vampire the Requiem definitely had a sort of a balloon, a bubble of hype that it couldn't sustain. But a lot of the die-hard, the hardcore fans of Masquerade, of which I was one, who would buy every single source book and soak up every drop of lore that was dropped in the World of Darkness, we were an extreme minority. The vast majority of gamers wanted the core book. I mean, was it? So this long tail of releases that Masquerade or D&D or any other RPG had, 2nd edition D&D is a very good example of that. The ridiculous number of campaign settings and source books about the most extreme wedges of information. I love that kind of stuff, but they don't sell for shit.
That's the yeah going understanding of that. It's too bad. I love sinking my teeth in a good lore as well. All the games I've liked through the years, especially the '90s. It was like Legend of the Five Rings because you could go deep on it. Like
Hmm.
yeah, a lot of those games. So
Yeah, yeah, it was a big thing in the 90s. Shadowrun, Cyberpunk as well. All of these games really made a big thing of a surfeit of source books. And they clearly did moderately well, or they trapped themselves in a cycle of publication that required it because a lot of companies were doing it. I don't know how much of it was based on consumer demand and how much of it was contracts essentially that said they had to release so much. I would have to look into that, but it's an interesting phenomenon that isn't really reflected in publishing today. I think the closest replacement to it is community content. Storytellers Vault, DM's Guild, Storypath Nexus, Miskatonic, was it Library, I think, for Call of Cthulhu. That
Companions of
is,
Ardor.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That is where you get your deep dives, your obscure lore stuff now. If you want it, it is definitely there. You're just not going to find it stacked up 10 books high on a friendly local gaming store shelf because they won't be able to sell 10 books in one location. You can online because that goes globally, but in a bookstore, you'd be lucky to sell more than a few because the old philosophy is if you have 6 people at a gaming table, and that's probably too many, but if you have 6 people at a gaming table, let's argue that all 6 buy the player's handbook and that no one's sharing. Let's argue that 3 of them buy the DM's guide and the monster manual because 2 of them may want to run in the future. Let's argue that a couple of them buy the Forgotten Realms campaign setting. And then you start getting into Monsters of Faerun and the Unapproachable East. I'm going through 3rd edition releases now. Increasingly, there's only one person at that table, maybe half a person at that table, who's going to buy all of these things. So it's diminishing returns no matter what the game is. And that's not sad. That's not some tell-all or anyway tragic. That's just the nature of the business. And it's a good reason for why companies release new core rulebooks. It's a better way of capturing more players, essentially. And it's a way to stay in business.
That's been my observation for sure. You worked quite a bit through the Chronicles of Darkness. Now, when you were first involved, was it still World of Darkness?
Good question. I think Mummy the Curse, when I first worked on that, was still World of Darkness. Yeah, that was prior to the Chronicles of Darkness core book's release, I think.
Because they started to move towards like a second edition right before the news hit about um, Paradox, right? Like there was
Yeah.
Smoke, for example.
Yeah, that is true. I think, yes, Mummy the Curse would have still been World of Darkness because I was working for Onyx Path around the time of, yeah, Mummy, Beast, Demon. Each of those is a World of Darkness game, technically, rather than a Chronicles of Darkness game. Demon might be a bit of an edge case because Demon is kind of the transition book to Chronicles of Darkness because it introduces the God Machine. Or reintroduces the God Machine from a very tiny bit of fiction in the original World of Darkness core rulebook. And the God Machine then forms the basis of the God Machine Chronicle, which became the Chronicles of Darkness book. That's it, because CCP didn't want a second edition of World of Darkness. They just weren't interested in it. But they didn't have a problem with a book called the God Machine Chronicle. They didn't have a problem with a book called Blood and Smoke. So they didn't mind a sort of discreet backdoor into a second edition. They just didn't want to release games called Vampire the Requiem second edition. So at some point, either between or after the transition from CCP to Paradox, Blood and Smoke got rebranded as Vampire the Requiem 2nd Edition, and God Machine Chronicle got rebranded as Chronicles of Darkness, with a few bits added and a few bits removed. So it's a bit of a messy couple of years. I've still got a copy of Blood and Smoke and the God Machine Chronicle, for that matter, because I bought them when they were new. But I don't think that makes them collector's items or anything like that. It's sadly, I'm not going to be able to retire on them.
We were actually playing in online games with Olivia Hill at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Blood and Smoke was written, so that was fun. Did you, from there, I'm pretty sure you did, but I want to fact check myself on this one. You were involved in V5, were you not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in the core book team and the developer of the majority of the first wave of books for V5.
I thought so. Okay.
So I worked for Paradox, I worked for Onyx Path, I still work for Onyx Path. And with Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, I was, I guess, primarily the lore writer for V5, though I ended up doing quite a lot of work just all over the place, wherever it was asked. I was happy to have the work, quite frankly. And so I worked as a writer on V5, Camarilla, and Anarch. And then I was the developer of Chicago by Night, Let the Streets Run Red, Chicago Folios, Cults of the Blood Gods, Trails of Ash and Bone, Children of the Blood, and Forbidden Religions. So quite a few, as well as working on various V5 board games, card games, video games, and so on. So I was pretty enmeshed, I suppose, in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition. I'm not working on it presently, but that never say never.
Exactly. I really enjoyed some of the things that found their way over, like back from Chronicles of Darkness or New World of Darkness back in, Blood Potency finding its way. Mm-hmm. Seemed like I always enjoyed that. Even though there was generation, it was neat to see the two contrast against each other. I liked the mechanical move away from like your blood as a currency to your blood as a hunger. Like what is this doing?
Yeah.
It was a very interesting narrative move there.
I can't recall if hunger was a creation of Ken Hite or Karim Amar, who is at Paradox. One of the two of them, maybe together, they came up with hunger. But yes, blood potency and various elements of Vampire the Requiem, especially Vampire the Requiem 2nd edition, jumped to Masquerade. And it would have been nice, I guess, if Masquerade had credited the Requiem authors for that. But also, cynically, I know that we all take and borrow and draw inspiration from, depending on the words you want to use on any given day, from all kinds of games. Like the lore sheets in Vampire are from a game called Weapons of the Gods. They were not invented for Vampire.
I didn't know that. Okay.
And that was, I think, Ken's idea to have lore sheets, and then I ended up writing all of them up. I wrote a lot more that didn't appear in the V5 core book, and so I doubt they will ever see print. But there's a lot of material out there because the development of V5 would probably be a video all on its own, talking about what a chaotic time that was, to put it generously. There are various other words you could use to describe that process, but it was fun, but chaotic.
Yeah, that's very fair. I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to keep this as following a chronology as possible for you. I believe you went into the some development yourself, where you were actually leading work out. Sorry, I want to get the name right here. Is it they came from beyond the beneath the sea? Yeah, beneath the sea.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that would have been It was in 2017 that I started writing full time. Prior to that, I had various jobs, but my job for several years had been as a technical trainer at a company and various companies. And so I wrote as a side gig, weekends, evenings, that kind of thing. I was never earning enough that I could make a living from it. In 2016, 2017, I pitched They Came From Beneath the Sea, which was my version of I guess, MST3K meets, 1950s B-movies, sci-fi, Larry Blamire movies like Trail of the Screaming Forehead and Lost Skeleton of Cadavra, that kind of thing, into a role-playing game format. I pitched it to Onyx Path. Rich Thomas, the creative director, really enjoyed the idea, so we moved ahead with it. Now, I had developed books prior to that for Onyx Path, but this was my very first game that I had seen from concept through to execution. And it was a huge amount of fun to work on. Larry Blamire, the movie director, is a co-writer on it. I've actually written with him on lots of things since then. I approached him via, I think, LinkedIn. I had set up a profile on that god-awful website just to find him and say, oh, would you like to work on this? And yes, he was very keen. But the They Came From series has... I don't know if it is the most prolific game Onyx Path has put out. I don't mean successful. Prolificness and success aren't the same thing. But we've got They Came From Beneath the Sea, They Came From Beyond the Grave, They Came From Camp Murder Lake, They Came From the Cyclops' Cave, They Came From Classified, They Came From the RPG Anthology, with 11 games in it, and source books for almost all of these game lines separate to the core book. So we have done a lot of They Came From work. It's a consistent seller. I think people love the idea of cinematic RPGs. It's a genre of RPG that doesn't really get explored much. I think it's Evil Genius does Everyday Heroes, which is a very similar kind of game, but I obviously think They Came From does it better. And They Came From is a way, more than comedy, it is a way of making your games action-packed, explosive, fun, unafraid and unashamed of making a joke at the villain's expense, or indeed your character's expense, utilizing things like a meta currency of rewrites so that you're basically building your game like a movie. You can insert deleted scenes, you can cut reels out, you can have a bullet deflect off your character and hit an extra, that sort of thing. So the idea was to say, look, it's all right to have fun with RPGs. I had spent many, many years, and still have, working almost exclusively on horror games. So the idea of writing a game or developing a game and co-writing it that was explicitly fun in nature was very appealing to me. I think we can sometimes get a bit snobbish about the idea of a game just being for laughs, because immersion is a very big selling point for good reason. I like immersion in RPGs, but lightheartedness is good too.
Did you ever have any experience with the Call of Cthulhu Blood Brothers book? Have you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Okay, they were. It was my first experience in that sort of genre, where those stories that you could play through, the investigations you play through, are very non-standard Call of Cthulhu. They're all based on bad B-movie sort of formats and setups, and some of them were just brilliant. And it is a refreshing take from sort of taking it too seriously to just really lean into the tropes of that sort of genre and just enjoy yourself. So I could definitely see there being some fun in that.
Yeah. We the thing about They Came From that I always find most striking is the writers really enjoy working on them. Every time I put a team together to work on a book, I'll set up a Slack or a Discord or some other communal working space. And you will never get as much conversation, as many ideas thrown around as you do with the They Came From game. And that enjoyment bleeds through to the material that's presented in the book. So it is a genuine laugh to play, and is the kind of thing I think if you just want an easy night with friends or an easy gaming weekend, it's a bit like having a movie weekend, you're slobbing or playing video games with your friends. They came from is very low intensity in that regard. But it was around that time I started writing full time because I was getting sufficient work to justify it, and I was getting paid well enough to justify it as well. So yeah, since then I've done nothing but write and develop and edit and all the other various RPG things that I do to pay the mortgage.
Very cool. It's that the thing you always gotta, I guess you wish for, and then it is its own thing though. I think there's a lot of people that sort of wish they could break into that space, and even part time. So it's cool to have been on the outside, watched you kind of break in through your own means, and not knowing your background. Even I didn't know you were trying to make it in, but it was cool to see how you were able to transition, from what you were doing in the YouTube space. You were very well known, I think, back then, and seeing that transition into success over time and the TTRPG space is very cool. So
it was never my intention to do it full time. I had always just anticipated I would occasionally write on games when contracts came in. The big thing that swung it for me was I was working on a video game for Paradox Interactive that was sadly cancelled. Over 50% of video games Paradox start working on, they cancel. And this was sadly one of them. And that isn't a made-up number. They cancel an awful lot of the projects they start. And this one, which was Vampire the Masquerade, or Vampire the Dark Ages related, I should say, was something that was definitely paying well enough that I could just jack in my previous career. And it came with certain assurances that you will be the project lead on the first expansion pack. I was a writer on the first one, on the core game, and because of how much I was putting into it, they said, would you like to lead the first expansion? Because you know how Paradox releases a core game and then it's expansion. So everything was looking very, very good. And then the boom fell. And that game was cancelled. And so I was thinking, crap, I've left my job and I no longer work for Paradox. And it was kind of serendipitous that I had sufficient written work, I guess, TTRPG work going at the same time, that I didn't suffer a massive loss in income. I had enough RPG work to fill the gap. And since then, I don't think I've stopped working because it's such a... there's a degree of it that's perilous. The idea that if you stop working, it's the old self-employed issue of the idea if you take a break, there's about 100 people waiting to take your place. So you can never stop. So that fear, I guess, exists. But on the other hand, I know that I've built up enough of a reputation for consistency that I probably don't have to worry about it too much. I just have an unhealthy balance of work and life where if it's my turn to relax, I will probably relax by doing more work, just less intensely. So the good news is it keeps the roof over my head.
That's an important part, right? So
yeah,
I can't fault you for that. Now, you've done a whole bunch of work with various games across the way. If I'm browsing some of this correctly, like you've been involved in some Call of Cthulhu releases, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, I've worked on Call of Cthulhu, and I always enjoy working on Call of Cthulhu. I wish I could work on it more. I'm guessing you're looking at my website right now, and that page has run out of characters. I've got a resume page where I list all of the projects I've co-written or developed, and I can't add to it anymore. It won't let me. So I've got to either start deleting things or set up a second resume page, which seems pointless. But yes, Call of Cthulhu, I think my first Call of Cthulhu work was working on the Flotsam and Jetsam campaign. There was an organized play Call of Cthulhu campaign several years ago. I'm not sure how well it did because I did the work, submitted it, and pretty much that got paid and moved on. But that was a nice traditional Innsmouth based. There's an auction. Oh no, not an auction. A will reading, and something gets left to you, and the resident Deep One family is very unhappy about this. So you then get pursued. There's a bank robbery. There's all kinds of hijinks in that. I worked on Cold War Cthulhu in what was probably... This was a Cubicle 7 game. And it's not in print anymore, but I'm sure you can find it somewhere. The worst title for a scenario I could ever come up with. I don't know why, and I will put my hands up and say I don't reread old material of mine, but I remember the title I gave this scenario. Cold War Cthulhu, everything's espionage base, of course. And so typically it's an operation whatever. And I gave this scenario in Cold War Cthulhu such an atrocious, utterly crap title. And I can't even remember the scenario now because the title, which was never edited, it wasn't changed. Clearly someone at Cubicle 7 thought, yep, that works. I just thought, God, that's crap. And so I'm not going to mention it on this stream. If people want to look it up, they can. But it is terrible. And I wrote a Call of Cthulhu book for an entire book, about 120,000 words of it during lockdown, or ending during lockdown, for Call of Cthulhu. It hasn't been announced yet. Who knows if it ever will be. I know Chaosium, I love Chaosium, but they also have very long tails in terms of you do your work. You might not see it in print for 4 or 5 years.
Wow.
So you just kind of have to say, okay, well, I've got paid, now I'll move on. So, and sometimes projects get cancelled, and while a writer might be informed, there's no obligation to. So, yeah, I wrote an entire book. I can't talk about that one, but it does exist, and I was very happy with it. And I playtested lots of scenarios from it. So there are people out there that know what it contains, but without breaching too many NDAs, I'll say there's a significant yellow tinge to it.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it's a very jaundiced book.
Yeah, I remember John Wick's Curse of the Yellow Sign trilogy there. I remember playing through the first one. It was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. Very Indiana Jones-esque, I'd say.
Yes.
So I noticed it was nice to see a resurrection of the Trinity and Trinity games. I remember owning those back in the late 90s, I want to say. The Trinity book I remember very specifically, but what was there? A Variant and...
So it was Aberrant and Aeon. And Aeon had its name. I'm not the expert on this, so I work with someone, Ian A.A. Watson, who knows all of this far better than I do. But my understanding is Aeon was released, which was the far future Trinity book. And back then they weren't Trinity books, it was just Aberrant and Aeon. And Aeon Flux was released on MTV, I think, a TV series, around the same time. And due to some kind of challenge, legal or otherwise, Aeon was then re-released with stickers over the Aeon title that said Trinity, if I remember. And so, yeah, you can still buy these copies of Aeon, at flea markets and games conventions and like that just have a big sticker over the title. Those were all ring-bound RPGs and things like that. It was a different time. But yeah, since then, all of those games have been published in a second edition by Onyx Path as the Trinity Continuum game line. So you've got the Trinity Core, which is sort of near future leverage style game, warehouse, whatever it is, game, lots of adventures and pulp action. You have Aberrant again, which is very, very popular, one of our most popular game lines. People do love the superheroes in aberrant form. There's Trinity Continuum Aeon and Adventure, which is very much Indiana Jones punching out Nazis and so on, which is never a bad thing.
Like a pulp game, if I...
Yeah, exactly. 1930s pulp. And then you've got the new Trinity Continuum games. So I developed Trinity Continuum Aether, which is steampunk, Victoriana. Nikola Tesla discovers this aether element, which allows people to, you can ingest it, you can inject it, you can turn yourself into some kind of superhuman or mutant monstrosity. It's a bit Resident Evil in a way, but in the 19th century. And then we have Anima, which is likewise future. It's kind of an MMORPG layered on top of a reality. So most of the people in it exist in a VR state almost permanently. It's better than the real world. Better than life, as Red Dwarf would put it.
Right.
And Trinity Continuum Aegis, or Aegis, which has only just been released on DriveThruRPG, which is our Bronze Age Greece Trinity Continuum game. And each one... Oh, and of course, how can I forget? Very recently crowdfunded Trinity Continuum Steam Wars, which...
Love that. Yeah.
Which is working again with Larry Blameyer. He released a graphic novel some years ago called Steam Wars, which we really loved, and he spoke to us about, should we make an RPG of it? And we said, yeah, and you know what? This would work really well in the Trinity Continuum. The idea that in each Trinity game, there's the idea of having talents. Your characters are talented in some ways, whether that means you're more lucky, you have superheroic abilities, you're cybernetically augmented, or whatever the case may be. Your characters are slightly above the run of the mill in your capabilities. In Steam Wars, which is set in 1897, I want to say, it might be 1895, but late 19th century, the talents are actually the steam rigs, these colossal iron giant mech that you pilot into battle. So I had a lot of fun with that because I love reading history. And that's a game where you can look at that pre-Great War international alliance structure that is ready to break down. And we have changed it, tweaked it slightly. So if you're a fan of diplomacy, as you were talking about, you can very easily see the blocks moving around. So it's a game where you have your battlefield combat in mechs, your steam rigs. You've got your diplomacy, your espionage, your adventure as well, where you're not in a walking battle tank. So there's a lot to recommend that one. And we recently crowdfunded that, and that did quite well. So yes, the Trinity Continuum is definitely going strong. Stronger than it was on its first edition, probably, because of how many games we've got out for it.
Absolutely. I know I don't want to keep you all day, and I know there's still a couple of things to talk about. I did want to talk about The World Below, because that is, I believe, one of your direct brain children, if I can say so. Yeah, and it's very cool. So, how did that initially spawn? Where did that come from, origin wise, for you?
Very strangely, it came about. I used to be a co-host of the Onyx Pathcast, which is currently on an extended hiatus because we did a new episode every week for about 4 years. And we needed a bit of a break. And sometimes on the Onyx Pathcast, we would do like a game brainstorming session where we would take prompts given by the other co-hosts and come up with a game within 5 minutes. And often the game ideas we came up with were utterly terrible. Or they could work as a 2-page PDF, but not really as a whole game line. And I came up with The World Below based on one of them, which was a subterranean fantasy horror RPG where something disastrous occurred on the world above, the surface world, driving refugees to seek shelter in the world below. And the world below is already inhabited by some people, some creatures, some environmental effects, and your arriving there destabilizes the ecosystem. your characters are descendants of those refugees. No one returns to the surface now, or if you do, it's pretty much done for you. You'll either return as a slithering maniac, or you just won't come back at all. And so your job in the world below, I suppose, is survival. It's exploration. It's community building. There's a whole base building system in there. And the game is divided into two phases. It's very Pendragon influenced, in fact, in that regard, that you have your exploration phase and you have your calm phase. In exploration, you venture around the tunnels, you find your resources, you kill your monsters, you seek out the secrets of the world below and the world above. During calm, you retreat to your settlement, because it's a bit of an ironic name. Chaos storms will start whipping round the wild parts, the wilderness of the world below. And they will change the environment, and they will agitate the monsters. So you need to sort of put your defenses up. That's your winter phase, I guess, where you will also be working on family stuff, local concerns, building stables and such, like you might do in Pendragon. And it's a game that has really found an audience. I am so happy with how well it's done. We crowdfunded it last year, I think, and it's just been released on DriveThruRPG in PDF and print on demand. It is a beautiful book. I don't think we've ever used such vivid colors in an RPG before. And it was a chance to work with Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, who I hired on to write a fair amount of the setting and monster material. He co-wrote that with Michele Masala, another awesome author. But yeah, the entire writing team on that game was fantastic. And Ed is a constant font of fantastic ideas. So yeah, very happy with the world below.
I remember watching one of your videos on that where you were talking about the base building aspect, the winter phase piece, as it were, and you made a couple of references. As you were referencing these games, I started to realize, I'm like, oh, I might have a type, right? So you mentioned Pendragon, you mentioned Song of Ice and Fire, and then you mentioned House of the Blooded.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to mention that one.
Yes. Yeah, so it was interesting to see that take, and I did want to mention to you that we're looking at, in my actual plays, looking at finding a way to sort of take a break from Pendragon every now and then. So I've actually been seriously contemplating running a Roll Below as a monthly, like sort of. Oh. It's as
well,
brands
fantastic.
Yeah, so
I hope you do, and let me know your thoughts if you do so. I can always guess it.
Right, we'll bring you on. You can show us how to survive in that game.
I'll say, no, you're running it wrong.
Yes,
I won't do that.
The canon police will arrive.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of games with dynasty mechanics, base building mechanics, things that imply that the world is larger than your characters, and not to make them insignificant. It's one of the things that I have always struggled with, let's say, Warhammer 40,000, or 40k would be a better way to say, wouldn't it? RPGs, the idea of characters feeling utterly insignificant in the face of a cruel and uncaring universe. Whereas in a game like Pendragon or The World Below, or House of the Blooded, or Song of Ice and Fire, and other games that do that kind of generational play, your character is important, but so is the next generation, and so is the one prior to yours. And where you will take your story from is when you start looking at the family trees you've been building, and you will actually be able to look at this and think, wow, we all of us players, and the person running, we built something. This wasn't just an A to B, complete the quest and retire afterwards, which is a fine way to play, but it's something even grander than that. So often those kinds of games require a little more time investment, but I think that the payoff for doing so can really feel fantastic. It's a communal experience which is quite unlike any other, even in role-playing. I think when you start building entire legacies out of your RPGs, and hence legacy games for board games, there's a reason they started doing that as well.
I agree. It's a very unique experience. Um, on that note, I thought I'd maybe ask you what you're working on these days, or have recently worked on, perhaps.
Nothing. I've retired. So I'm working on a lot. I'm always working on a lot. And I will get to the one you're asking about in particular in a moment. I am working on Monster Kingdoms, which is a Napoleonic Wars style fantasy game where the Empire, Holy Roman Empire kind of thing, has utterly broken up. And you, or I was on the verge of doing so, and the various kingdoms in the fantasy world. I think I've got the pen sketched map of it over here. So you won't be able to make any sense of this thing on camera, but that was my initial map of the kingdoms of Monster Kingdoms, all divided up.
The people pausing and zooming in and using HDIs. Yeah.
Yeah, we will have to see how much that changes. I'm terrible at drawing maps. You'll learn nothing. But your characters can represent different kingdoms, or they can be mercenaries representing a single one, or being independent of. And it is an evil game. It is a game where you are playing monsters. This is not a game where you're playing heroes. You theoretically can, but it's a world that has definitely fallen into darkness, and your characters will have abilities that further that. So it's always interesting writing a game like that without trying to aim for edginess. I think you see that you need a certain amount of cool. It isn't supposed to be always tragic. It should be authentically fun to play bad characters in this, and walking that line between I've got an action that makes my enemy explode into gory chunks. That's fun. Having an action that I don't know. I can't even think of something right now. Something that's edgy for the sake of shock, and that's less fun. But then again, it's only someone as chunks could be.
Insert Sabbat action here. Yeah.
Yeah. There is a whole contingent of players who love Sabbat play. I love playing as Sabbat. And Monster Kingdoms is supposed to be that. It is part of the Earthbane cycle, which is connected to the world below, connected to another game called Out the Gates. They have some DNA, though we haven't made it clear what the connection is yet, but the connection does exist. So Monster Kingdoms is the big one. I am also still working on Curseborne. Curseborne is on its path big, and it is doing really well. Even after the Kickstarter's closed, people keep ordering it via BackerKit. It is our big new urban horror game, and people really seem to be jiving with the options of play. You're hungry, you're primal, sorcerer's dead, and outcasts. They love the liminal spaces element, the liminalities, the fact that you can basically pass through a door and enter a witch house kind of thing. The urban horror style creeps and critters. It has a bit of a Lynchian feel to it, a bit of an X-Files-y feel to it that I really enjoy. And I'm also working on Kult Divinity Lost, which is a game that I have ran plenty for Red Moon Role-Playing if you want a good horror actual play to listen to. And I just recently got done writing a scenario for that. But the big book, and this is a big book because it was a big project. I solo wrote it, and this is the second time I've done this for Chaosium. Hopefully I'll hear more of this one's release than I did for the Call of Cthulhu one. Is Inish Fall, which is the Isle of Destiny. It is for Pendragon, the Ireland sourcebook, and it's a meaty book. This is a book that I spent a lot of time researching, and I mean, hands up, right away, I am not Irish. I am not even close to Irish. I mean, I guess you could in geographical proximity say so, but I am not Irish. However, I did spend a lot of time researching, and I mean a lot. I read so much, I immersed myself in so much of the mythology, and it was fantastic, mind-blowingly fantastic, the material I could find out about it. And this isn't the first time Pendragon has visited Ireland. Pagan Shore was a book released in the, I want to say, early 90s for Pendragon. And I've actually been able to utilize some of the pagan shore material in Ishval, but for the most part, it's all new stuff. Ireland is a really interesting place in the period of Pendragon, I guess the pseudo period of Pendragon, because if you go with the whole 5th and 6th centuries of Pendragon idea that Uther is late 5th century, Arthur is 6th, Ireland, this is kind of pre-Viking invasion, and the English, such as they are, or the people of Logres and Britannia, aren't really present there in any meaningful way. And so you have to take some liberties. But this is the same with Pendragon itself. Norman castles did not exist dotted across England in the 5th century. Tintagel, I'm afraid, was not some massive battlement-strewn colossus on the coast. But what that means is I have taken, certain liberties to present mythological Ireland, or mythical Ireland would be a better way to say it, that spans everything from the Ulster cycle and the Fenian cycle and lots of sources, putting it all in and representing in the different kingdoms of Ireland, because Ireland is split between lots of different kingdoms, different elements of the mythos. Now, obviously, a lot of this ties to Arthurian myth too. It's interesting how much Arthurian myth does take place in Ireland, how much of it is, I wouldn't say it's the genesis of what we take for stereotypes of Ireland. There's plenty of points like that, but Arthurian myth doesn't always do Ireland well. But you can still take elements from Arthurian myth, you can work them into a Pendragon context, and all of a sudden, a rampaging colossal wild boar tearing up the Munster countryside is a questing beast style threat. It is something that you can take on and have a heroic campaign trying to take down. This is not the kind of beast you're going to be able to just take down with swords and a cavalry charge. This is... you can attach lots of magic to it. And I would say that there is a more magical feel to Inishval than, I guess, straight Pendragon. The Game Master's Handbook, which is coming out very soon for Pendragon, has some rules for magic in, I think, but there is a whole magic-focused sourcebook that will be coming out before my one. And the ability to play druids, sorcerers, their apprentices, the ability to play bards and priests and so forth, without making it D&D-rific, is somehow appropriate to Ireland because of how many of the myths based there invoke magic. There's an awful lot more of it than the more straight-laced view that history consistently takes with King Arthur. Or at least movies and other media presents, where they try and make it very Crusader Kings more than Merlin, you know? So, yeah, I appreciate I'm rambling a lot. This was a book I had a lot of fun working on. And it presents new playable options. It presents a lot of historical and geographical information that you can utilize immediately in your campaigns. There's a whole saga, a massive campaign at the back of it. Great Pendragon campaign style that stretches, I want to say 13 years. So well enough to see through one character's adult life. And takes you around Ireland at least around central and then southern. So, yeah, you visit a lot of places that, yes, in the 5th century, Dublin was probably little more than a fishing village because the Vikings hadn't come along yet, and it wouldn't have been called Dublin at this point. Wicklow didn't exist in the way that we know it now. But you take these liberties to make it a creatively interesting place. And then there's the whole Castle Rigomere thing, which is the greatest Irish Arthurian myth. I've got this book just to hand. The amount of time I spent studying this The Marvels of Rigomir. Now, the Marvels of Rigomir is a book of Arthurian legend, which is set exclusively in Ireland. And it's mostly Lancelot going around winning constantly. You can't.
He doesn't do anything else, right?
No. It's actually it. What it is a collection of lots and lots of short stories that would have existed at the time to form a saga of sorts of Lancelot and Gawain, I believe, heading over to Ireland and trying to find Castle Rigomir, this sorceress castle that can addle the mind if you enter it and don't pass the right trials. Lancelot succumbs, and Gawain heads out to free him. And read as a chronologically linear story, it is dull as hell. Because it is just Lancelot finds some bandits. He kills them. Lancelot finds a woman in distress. He frees her and beds her, and so on. And it goes on and on and on. But you can easily see when reading it how each of these little stories, when told at a campfire to a group of friends 500 years ago, would have been utterly captivating. They're adventure stories. You tell them, a couple of weeks later, you tell the next one, and it's a familiar protagonist, and they're doing something different but equally as heroic. So I was able to look at the Marvels of Rigomir and take certain encounters, characters, myths, monsters, and so on that appear in there and put them in this Inish File book, our Isle of Destiny book for Pendragon, to make it actually use Arthurian Irish myths, which do exist. There's more sparing than the English ones, of course, but they do exist out there.
I believe they even have that as part of the Great Pendragon campaign. In the older editions, the expansion of Arthur's kingdom into Ireland. I did want to mention, though, I had an opportunity to play in a campaign set in Dalriada, run by Peter Corliss, and he ran us through a whole kind of Irish adventure and journey around the Hag of Bara, and it was a lot of fun. So I can definitely see, taking Pendragon sort of out of its, let's say, its vanilla or default position of Salisbury,
and which is where I live, ironically.
Okay.
Cool. So that means I get to look at the Great Pendragon campaign and look at how the villages or fiefdoms around Sarum are named and think, why oh why in so many editions of Pendragon is Winterbourne Gunner still spelled Winterbourne Gunnet in the Great Pendragon campaign? It has never been called that. It's a typo. No one has ever picked it up, but I'm putting Pendragon on that. But yeah, all of these places exist. It's great fun running Pendragon for people who live down here because we all know these locations. But you're right. Ireland presents it isn't just a different culture. Ireland is actually a very different geography to England. You've got considerably more mountains, more swamp, certainly a lot more swampland. And that means you can really play with the idea of wilderness a lot more, I think, than the way regular Pendragon is presented, which is kind of fiefdom, battlefield, fiefdom, castle. Ireland has a lot more crag and bog to it, which is a lot of fun and presents different challenges.
Very, very cool. I'm looking forward to that, and I know there will be a whole group of Pendragon people that follow my YouTube that will be excited to hear about that as well. I'm curious, when did you first come into playing or being aware of Pendragon?
The first time I played Pendragon was probably about 2003, I want to say. No, it would have been a bit later than that. 2005. where I moved to a city called Norwich, joined a new gaming group, and in Norwich, the game we were playing was the Great Pendragon campaign. I joined during Uther's reign, and it was a pretty terrible game. I love the Great Pendragon campaign. I think it's a wonderful skeleton of a campaign, but the idea is the game master has to add a lot of meat to the bone. You can't just run it as written.
Not at all.
This GM was running it as written. So there are some years in the Great Pendragon campaign where it basically says there's lots of rumors in court, but nothing else happens. Or nothing else happens to you in Salisbury. And then you just jump to the winter phase. And clearly, for most game masters, what you'd be doing at that point is providing characters with some plot that presents them with things to do. You would have some Saxon scouts intruding on your land, or even some Franks landing on the south coast have been spotted about that kind of thing. Or go mystical with it and have a member of your family disappear in the Savernake woods, and it turns out that there's a fairy prince or something like that who is trying to take a bride. And you can do all of that. That isn't what this game master did. This game master ran what was on the page, and then we spent far longer each year in the winter phase. Now, the only positive to that, because we played that for several months, was it really gave me an appreciation for what the winter phase can be in a game. This was the first game I'd ever played with that kind of downtime. And because the downtime was actually uptime for our gaming group, and was where we were building families, adding family trees, trying to produce healthy families, and what's more, going into the base building side of it, well, I want to augment my fiefdom with a stable. I want to add a Fletcher's or a Cooper's. And between each of the players, we essentially built an ecosystem around Sarum where, okay, you're the master of horses, I'm the master of hounds, you're the master of fisheries, and so on, to increase our income. It became more strategy game-like than role-playing game-like. And any role-playing was the players pushing it rather than the GM. So that isn't ideal, but that was an upside because it showed me what can be done with Pendragon. So it was a couple of years after that I actually got to run the Great Pendragon campaign. I'd moved again and was running for a different group, and I realized, it isn't actually as bad as it seemed. You can do a lot with this. And since then, I have ran Pendragon plenty. I ran it during lockdown, actually, for some of my regular gaming group. We were having to play over Zoom for the first time, or Facebook Messenger or something like it, where previously we'd been meeting up every single week to play. We'd been doing that with Horror on the Orient Express. We'd just finished that. We decided they're not wanting an easy time of it. They wanted to go into another massive campaign, so it was Great Pendragon campaign. Then COVID happened, so we were all on camera. And so it's kind of got a special place for me because I can associate that time, which was obviously quite stressful and troublesome, with having a connection with my friends still via camera and playing this game with them, even if they did get Earl Roderick killed by King Uther. These things happen. Yes, just for the Pendragon fans watching, King Uther, you could say, is an unstable monarch as his reign goes on. I like to present him as very good at some things and quite unreliable at others. Much like his bastard offspring, Madoc, who I don't always just kill when he's supposed to die, because often players grow quite attached to Madoc during the course of the game, as he's clearly heroic, he's gruff, he's not the direct inheritor to the throne, therefore he has an outsider, a bad boy attitude that people really gravitate to, so just killing him off screen is not really something I like to do.
I feel like the real plot tie there, given what happens in the Frankish campaign, is to tie him to the Zagreus. Like, right, like as a full circle.
Yeah, This is a chance for him to claim what's potentially his. And I've certainly worked up things like that in my latest campaign because I'm running it for 2 Patreon groups. But yes, in my personal group, my local group, the players were put on trial. I can't remember if this is part of it is part of the Great Pendragon campaign that you are put on trial and you're able to clear your name. And Uther basically gave them all a warning and said, "You're on notice if I hear any more talk of." That's after Arthur's kidnapped, I think, after he's disappeared by Merlin, and the player characters are essentially accused of consorting with Merlin on this, and they can clear themselves in the campaign. In our game, they cleared themselves, but just barely. And Uther said, "If I ever get a sniff of treason from any of you, it won't be you whose heads I take. It won't be your heads I take. Your Earl is responsible for your actions. It is your Earl who reports to me, basically. And I know how much you love Earl Roderick. Therefore, it will be his head that I remove." And as they were leaving the courtroom, essentially, one of the player characters decided, in trying to hide himself within the midst of the crowd, to shout something out derisory at Uther. And critically failed. It was a sort of Uther as John Cleese almost was. Okay, bring Roderick here. That's it. That does it. I'm taking his head. I don't know which one of you did this, but and yeah, they got Earl Roderick killed. The rest of the players were very unhappy with that particular player for doing that knee-jerk reaction. But yeah, it's amazing. I've now run it. This must be my 4th time, and it's amazing how different groups approach it in different ways. Obviously, I tweak it each time to keep it interesting to me, but having different players in it each time makes it interesting because everyone does these things in different ways.
And super conscious of the time, so I do want to close, and I can go for Pendragon. I can talk about for hours, but I will say I saw a recent AMA from you where you were talking about how much more you enjoy. I guess I don't want to paraphrase wrong, so please correct me if I'm. But you were saying that how much more you enjoy sort of the GMing versus the playing, and I think
very much so.
One of the things for Pendragon that's always hit me is, I had it on my shelf for years, and then I finally watched an actual play during the pandemic, and it opened up my eyes to what could be done specifically with the traits. The traits are what scared me away from the game the most when I first read it. But watching how much those characters can kind of come to life at the expense of the player behind them, it really puts a curveball in the predictability of where things are going to go, and I think that's one of the better parts of the game, or can kind of.
I'm actually a fan of alignments in D&D. I know they're not really de rigueur anymore, but I like them as shorthand. They're a very good on-ramp for new role players as well. How do I play this character? Well, what's your alignment? And yes, some people can lean on them, use them as a crutch, use them as an excuse to be an arsehole, Celtic neutral, looking at you. But Pendragon kind of abstracts alignment with the personality traits. So with your valor and with your greed and with your lust and your chasteness and so your chastity and so forth. It's still, in a sense, alignment. They are guidelines for how you're going to play your character, because if you've got 16 in lust, that indicates something about your character. And probably implies that you have played your character in a certain way. You're not going to got to 16 lust unless you have done some lusty things, or, on the other hand, not been chaste in the slightest. So, for most players, I find that those traits really help characters, help players play different characters each generation. That's where it's really interesting and where it feels quite Crusader Kings like, because if you play to your character's strengths, even though they may not be strengths on paper, and the same with your passions too, it can really make for a different experience mechanically as well as in role playing than if you decide you're just going to be the heroic knight each time who is honor bound, glory sworn, and will never, never betray your king. As soon as you start finding these chinks in the armor, typically through negative traits, but often through positive ones as well, because they can set you up to fail too. Faithfulness, or what is it, piety, versus worldliness, I think, is a really good one that is, in theory, being pious is fantastic in that era, except when it isn't. Except when it comes back to bite you. Yeah. So, I know I love that part of the system. It's probably my favorite part of Pendragon.
I think it's a well-liked sentiment there. I wanted to go ahead and give you a chance to shout out anything you'd like to shout out, socials, anything you'd like the audience to hear about.
Oh, well, I mentioned things like The World Below, and they came from the RPG anthology. Those are the big ones I would love more people to seek out, especially The World Below. I mean, I love all of the games I work on, more or less, but The World Below, I've only just released. It is on DriveThruRPG in print and in PDF, and depending on when you release this episode, there will be increases in prices on DriveThruRPG across the board as of April. So if people want to get The World Below now, that is not only going to help me, because I wanted to keep riding the top 10 wave on DriveThruRPG and maybe go from silver medalist to gold. It will also help you pay less when it comes to postage or printing. So I would love it if more people check The World Below out. I'd love it if people check They Came From the RPG anthology out if they love the idea of cinematic games. There are 11 games in that book. You've got westerns, you've got noir, you've got period costume dramas, Shakespearean theatre, you've got space opera, you've got murder mystery. This is me trying to remember all of them. Comic book superheroes. You have got, with that, pirate adventure movies. You've got fighting game, martial arts, beat-em-ups. You've got heist movies. And I believe I have successfully forgotten one of them. Well, that's a shame. But it's difficult to remember 11 in a row.
That's fair.
And further to that, if you want to play games that I run, they are always welcome to join my Patreon, patreon.com/Matthew Dawkins. I currently have 9 games a month that I run for 9 different groups, and I also run my weekly group for my local game, and a local game for my weekly game for my local group. There we go. We've clearly been doing it too long at this point. But if there's sufficient people who want to play another game, all they have to do is get in touch with me via Patreon or MatthewDawkins.com, and I'll let them know whether there's a slot in an existing game or whether we can set up a new one. There are very few games that are off the table. I will typically run anything if it strikes an interest.
Very good, very good. I imagine one of those might be the infamous Street Fighter, the role-playing game.
So we don't need it anymore. Street Fighter the RPG isn't a bad game. It's not great. It struggles to hit its mark because, of course, it constantly falls into 1v1 combat and leaves everyone else standing around. It's almost decking the RPG in that regard. It's, what are you up to? Nothing. Just waiting for him to finish fighting. And they came from the Steel Dragon Fighting Tournament, which is they came from the RPG anthology. We basically do Street Fighter the RPG, but improve it, which doesn't take much. That was a game from 1994 or thereabouts, Street Fighter, the RPG. But yeah, so very much recommend the Steel Dragon Fighting Tournament. That was a lot of fun to develop.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for your time, and looking forward to doing some more of this. I'll keep you in touch about The World Below. So thank you.
Please do, and thank you for having me.